Hello and welcome everyone to our last session of day 3 of our 2024 FCI Live series. Thanks so much for being here with us. We're excited to have you. We have had record registration and record turnout this time around. It has been a lively conversation already. We have one more full day of sessions tomorrow and then Monday through Thursday of next week as well. So we're really looking forward to it. Tonight, you're stuck with me. My name is JQ Hanna and I'm with Food Co-op Initiative. We're the host of this series. We are a small nonprofit organization, for any of you who don't know us, that exists solely to educate, support, and help out those communities that are trying to start their own food co-ops. So that's what we do, and I'm today also your presenter. I'm going to be talking to you about ownership matters, early, and specifically how it matters in the early organizing stages. Thanks for being here with us. And real quick, we want to give a shout out to our champion sponsors, Colluminate and National Co-op Grocers. We have many sponsors. We'll take a look at the list at the end. But these two have really stepped up to the champion level. We appreciate it. They have made this series possible. With that, I'm going to jump into sharing with you my main presentation. We're going to get into one of my favorite topics, which is ownership and membership. And the way, again, please put all your questions in the chat. I will do my best to monitor the chat. That's a little tough for me to do while I am presenting, but I will try and do that. We got a lot to cover. If you know me, I think I do a pretty good job, but I'm densely packed. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, but we shall see. Nope, that would be the wrong presentation. Okay. So those of you who are here, if you have, no, wrong one. If you have time to throw it in the chat, if you know what stage of development your co-op is in. If you don't, that is just fine. If you know what stage of development your co-op is in, can you throw it in the chat? Just give me a feel for who's here. And if you don't have the ability to do that or don't know, that is okay too. This is really aimed at, our conversation tonight is really aimed at the early stages. I think we can all get something out of this conversation, but it's especially aimed at those who are in some of the earlier stages. And we will have a session next week that partners this one that will be focused much more on the late stages, and it will be more advanced. Some of the more introductory information in here won't be there because it'll be for co-ops that are well into organizing in stage 2B and stage 3. So just checking out some of yours. Newly formed steering committee, love it. Some 2As, great. Okay, and more people arriving between 1 and 2A. Okay, fair, great. So I don't see any 3s. That's awesome. People are in the right place. All right. What we're going to cover in this session, I just wanted to let you know, and hopefully that came across in the session description. This is a big picture conversation kind of presentation. This is not a how-to session. But this is a really, I think, valuable and rich overview. Sometimes we get so busy in the work and how do I do this and how do I execute on that, that we forget why we're doing it and we don't really know where the pieces fit, right? So this came out of a lot of peer group conversations, if you're in our FCI peer groups, and just realizing that some of that really big picture of ownership, why it matters and what ownership success looks like in the stages was kind of getting lost. We weren't talking about it enough. So we'll cover what ownership is, why it's central to your co-op success, what the top ownership goals, activities are of our 2 earliest development stages, what success would look like in those stages, and also if you're running into trouble, what might be leading to some of that. So that's what we're going to cover today. Let's start with what the heck I wanted to let you know real quick. You might have heard the word owner. You might have heard the word member. You might have heard the term member owner. Tonight, we're treating those all as interchangeable. There are regional preferences. Also, we see these terms go in and out of fad. There's all sorts of thoughts on why one is better than the other. Use whichever feels like the best fit for your co-op. We consider all 3 of these absolutely acceptable, understandable, good idea options of how you're going to address who owns the cooperative. If it's your owners, your members, your member owners. FCI uses owner. So in this presentation, you'll see that term used. That is not saying that one is better than the other, it's just what we use. Okay, what do we mean by ownership? So if you're new to food co-ops, cooperatives, all cooperative businesses are committed to and based on the 7 cooperative principles, which you'll see on the right here. So we have these 7 principles, and these are not just committed to of every type of co-op in the United States, whether that's a financial co-op, a worker co-op, a food co-op, an ag co-op, an electric co-op, but actually these are the international cooperative business principles that are held kind of central in the vast majority of cooperative businesses of all types in North America, South America, Africa, Asia, and Europe. So this is central to every cooperative business that you're going to run across are these 7 principles. They are international. Um, ownership, our concept of ownership in food co-ops comes from principle 1 and principle 2, that to be a cooperative, it is voluntary to become an owner, or as it says here, a member. And it's open to everyone within a certain class. That can You can be just workers who work at your co-op. It can be just producers. In the vast majority of food co-ops, it means anyone who intends to shop with the food co-op and support the food co-op. So voluntary open membership plus the concept of truly democratic control come together and create food co-op concept of ownership in most co-ops, which is you have one share, you get one vote. That's what it means to be a member. Every legal adult can buy a share in the cooperative, and every share has one vote that is equal to all other votes. You cannot have multiple voting shares. There are other types of shares, but you cannot have multiple voting shares. No one individual can have more control than any other one individual at the ownership level. That is what it means to be a co-op. The shareholders then, so shareholders meaning owners, then elect from amongst ourselves a board of directors, basically meaning a group of people who are going to tend to a lot of the work in the day to day that we can't individually handle just because we want to get groceries. And so but these people are other volunteer owners, people who just own a share in the co op, who decide to run and are elected to actually run the organization. So that's kind of how these two values come together and create our concept. When we say democratic member control, we mean anyone can be a member, any legal adult can be a member, and that democracy means one vote per individual. No one has more control than that. It's actually kind of a radical idea. And for those of you who aren't visual, I will describe this. I'm very visual. So I like to also have like pictures that explain. And we've got a circle here, or it's like a donut shape that is made of like hundreds of dots. And they're black dots, and those are the owners. And then in the midst of the owners, you have like 9 purple dots that are bigger. Those are board members because they have more day-to-day control and investment and involvement. And then in the middle, you have a green dot in the middle of the board. So we've got the owners, board, and then in the middle, this green dot that is larger than all the other dots called management, which is eventually when you open your business, whoever runs this organization has the most day-to-day hands-on interaction with what's going on inside of your business. The owners, these hundreds of owners, elect the board. The board then hires the management. That could be one manager, a management team, and then has oversight of that management that reports to the board. The board reports to the owners. But nobody owns this place. No one has legal control except for the people in this circle. There's no hidden somewhere corporate office. There's no some hidden business expert somewhere. This is like legit. We're going to open, in most cases, if you're opening a food co-op, you're going to open a store that's going to do $1 million to $5 million, maybe even $10 million worth of sales a year. It's going to cost you usually, let's just say on average, 4 to 5 million to open a food co-op. Don't panic if that's the first time you've heard that. It does vary a lot depending on what kind of food co-op you want to open and what kind of community. But this is a serious business. And a bunch of volunteers who own one share, who all live in the same community together, are going to elect a board who's going to hire a manager, and we're going to run a business together. There's nobody else out there like hidden, actually, like the buck stops here, they're in charge. There's no corporate office. In our current times, this is a radical idea. It doesn't fit with the concept of the world that we are sold every day, especially as Americans. The idea that we could run businesses together, that we could use community organizing to gather together as a community, decide there's something we want to address, and to address it by opening and running a business together. Not a little business, a very serious, difficult, small margin, high loss business. Grocery is one of the toughest businesses out there. It has very low margins, meaning there's very little room for error, very little profit. The food is perishable, the need and the turnover is constant. It is a tough business. And we, a bunch of volunteers and community members, are going to organize and educate ourselves to build and own a grocery store. That's I mean, it's built on the concept that we as communities are actually able to solve our own problems and are trustworthy. And that is a very kind of radical concept based on the things that we've been taught about the world and what we're used to. We hear a grocery store showing up, it opens within 6 months. Someone in corporate made that decision, stuff shows up, the grocery store runs. And this is completely counter to that. And so you can see in this picture, let me go back for a second, how of course ownership matters. Of course ownership is critical, and getting owners is critical because they're literally the whole co-op. If you're going to open a cooperative business, it doesn't exist unless there are owners that are passionate and care about and invested in the vision and the plan of the cooperative. So they are center to all of this wild idea that we're going to organize and to develop and run a business together. Okay. So if any of you are really early in your organizing and you hear this and go, what? Wait a minute. Aren't we going to have a whole bunch of experts? And now, don't get me wrong, that green dot in the middle of our last picture that said management, that can also be your consultants before you have a general manager or a management team. That can be your project manager, but they still work for you. There's going to need to be community buy-in and expertise and education developed to be able to be legally in charge of this business and to even hire the right consultants or experts. There's no, they aren't going to take the place of that. It's going to fall to us in a cooperative. And it's a lot of work. Does that sound hard? It is. It's really hard. It's hard in a culture, especially like ours, to go out and convince a bunch of people that they share a vision and that we can wildly actually work together to develop this vision, this business idea, see if it's actually can work on a business level, come up with a plan, get it funded, get it built, find management, and run it successfully. That's a lot to convince people of, then to get them to invest in, then to get them to participate in, and then to educate yourself enough as leaders, if you're a board member or a steering committee member, to actually execute on all of this, certainly with the support of the owners, but the board holds the heaviest piece of this. It's hard. It's a lot. And if you don't specifically understand and want as a community the co-op model, the empowerment that comes from that, the choice to do this together, the control that you will have, that if it's not worth all that, and the leadership ability that you'll build within yourselves, and the trust as you'll build as a community, if that's not part of what you're needing most and looking for when you thought we need a grocery store, that's okay. But if you don't want that, if that isn't passionately at the center of what you want, if you don't want that as much as you want a grocery store, I'm going to suggest you might think of a different way to do it. It's not easy. And people will laugh. Are you telling people not to form co-ops? I'm not saying that. I'm saying I want people who want co-ops and know what they're up against and know and believe in the benefits to organize co-ops. But if your community needs a grocery store, there is the option of developing a small independently owned grocery store, even if other chains and stuff wouldn't come there or didn't come. You can find maybe someone who is already in the food industry, who is an entrepreneur. I've even, you as a layperson could spend all this time studying and learning how to build the business yourself. Also, there's the option of nonprofit grocery stores, especially if you're in a community that is historically redlined, has historically been kept from having access to capital and to the needs of your community. Nonprofit grocery stores have been spinning up for about 10 years all over the place. A lot of them have failed, but not all of them. This is actually a picture from the one in my community. We have a thriving food co-op in our downtown, and on our north side, we have a thriving nonprofit grocery store. It's half resale store and half grocery store. It sells conventional groceries. It actually has offices there for community services, and it's really filling a need in the community and doing a great thing. So that's as much as I'm going to say about that. But one thing I'm noticing is sometimes when people start deciding that okay, well, I'm curious, I'm interested in developing a food co-op. I've been talking with friends, with some community leaders, like we're thinking food co-op. Do we understand that that's going to mean actually believing that the community can do this and putting that trust and faith in the community and building at the speed of trust? And that is something Amaha Selassie says from Gem City Market. If you know that startup food co-op, he's on our board of directors as well, phenomenal leader. And he says we can only build at the speed of trust in cooperatives. And that is the case. But we're going to assume you've decided, your community's decided that they mean cooperative. They want a food co-op. So that's what we're doing. That we're not just we're building a phenomenal grocery store that is going to meet a need in our community. And also, we are actually building a cooperative. We are building a network of community and community strength and co-ownership. Okay, great. Why do owners matter then? Because if your organization is a cooperative, the owners literally define and legally own absolutely everything about the co-op. They are the co-op. They're the whole co-op. Gonna dive into what this looks like in each of the stages. I can already tell I have maybe more content than we need for tonight. So I might, the last few slides, the last few section isn't what I promised to deliver. So that might be, you'll get it in the slides. But I'm going to jump into this stage one and what it looks like. But first I'm gonna take a quick pause. Are there any questions that arose from what I've shared so far, or things that people want to ask or share? All right. Yeah, that is correct, Carol. That by legal adult, I just mean of age to enter into a legal contract. Yep, that is correct. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I'm going to jump into why ownership matters in the stages, in the early stages, what it looks like, what success looks like, where the problems can arise, why it matters. So in stage one, those of you who are like, we just formed a steering committee, congratulations. When you form a steering committee, we consider you stage one. It doesn't mean that you've decided you're going to run the whole race yet, but it means you've decided you're really going to try and organize and see if there's interest and capacity in your community. Stage one ends after we have a certain number of owners. We'll get into that. And you have our first democratic election. And we go forward to actually test the business model, to actually see if it's business feasible to build the exact kind of grocery store we were thinking of, if it needs adjusting, if it can work in our community. So much happens in stage one. And I'm not going to go into all that tonight. I created these like quickie bullet points. I'm like, oh my God, there's all the things that happen before we launch ownership. Yeah, absolutely, Dewan. You guys are in stage one. Exactly. Yeah. So, and we don't talk about that enough. So it's not a surprise you didn't know that. That's on us. We have an entire guide called the FCI Guide to Starting a Food Co-op. It is free on our website for download. You can order printed copy. There is a cost to that because it's print on demand. You're just paying the printer, but it is free on our website, and it will go into great depth of everything that needs to happen in stage one. Okay, so that's not what I'm covering tonight. But the things that definitely, in real shorthand, have to happen before you're even launching ownership in your cooperative and shares is, and that's common, by the way, Western Queens, that's really common, that we have a tendency, all of us as humans, to be like, and we got all this done, so now we're here and now we're here. And, you know, every startup does it. It's like, we're in 2B. I'm like, you're in early 2A. You have started some of the work that happens in 2B, but you haven't completed the stages work. So that's, and it's all relative. It's kind of, it's a loose shorthand so we understand each other. And not going to go too far into what happens in stage one and how long you're there. But stage one, I mean, startup food co-op can take 3 to 5 years to develop. It also can take 3, we are now seeing 10 years. There's a reason why 5 to 7 is kind of moving into average, but we've seen a lot open at 3 too. So stage 1 could be 6 months, stage 1 could be 3 years. It really depends. So reach out. We can always talk in more depth what that looks like, and why, and learn more about that together. Our To reach out to us and get some TA support is free. So you can reach out to us and we can set up an appointment. Um, so before you even launch ownership, you have to have the idea for the co-op. You have to study the idea, figure out if what's really what you want, and hopefully with a few other people. You have to test community interest and desire, which is what's happening in these photos over on the left. These are early community meetings before there was a steering committee meetings, of the South Philly Food Co-op, which opened on Christmas Eve of 2020, and of the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which will open like this April. And that was one of their very first community meetings. So that's what you mean, testing community interest and desire. Then we form a steering committee. If you're doing it in a slightly different order, don't panic. We legally incorporate. We can't launch ownership shares until we've legally incorporated, or at least we don't advise it. It has been done, but legally it is best to be legally incorporated as a cooperative. So the steering committee would say, oh yeah, there's interest. We're going to go ahead and incorporate, and they're going to incorporate and then develop a launch plan. That's a whole session into itself, but we don't just go, okay, we incorporated, everyone, you can buy shares. We communicate to the community these opportunities coming. We get people to pre-pledge to join on the day that we're going to launch shares. We try to make sure we're going to get a lot of momentum. Another day. But the big thing around ownership, the thing your eyes are on in stage 1 around ownership, is launching those shares successfully and getting that early ownership growth. So that's our big deal in stage 1. Why?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I guess my question was, is there an average amount of the investment shares that are offered? Does anybody know kind of the trend or the
or the number
average?
of them?
Mm-hmm. The cost and the number, because I guess it's based on what you're trying to, your capital stack, and what percentage come from that. But I guess I was just wondering what has been the range of those cost of shares.
Wow, I can tell you've done your research, Asada. He's like, because it does affect capital stack, but on average, the most common cost per share is $200 per share. And that is even in lower income communities, higher income communities. Gem City Market shares are $200. We have seen as low as 100. We have per share, and we have seen as high as 300, but that's uncommon. So they tend to be 100, 150, 200, but 200 is by far the most common. And the number that people sell, that's a whole thing. We'll get into all of that tonight.
Yeah, and just one more quick follow-up question. Do people allow for people to buy as many shares? I guess that's the number part. No worries. It's just something that piqued my interest. I'll
It's a
tag
really
it
good
and follow
question,
up. Yeah,
and
it
just
is.
one I can't get to tonight, but you should reach out. We can talk because you're
Okay,
asking excellent questions. Um, so why this is important? A lot of groups, because what I often hear from a lot of groups is, well, can we just not do that? Or we launch shares and we only got like 40 people and we're struggling, but we're focusing on business development right now. Why does this matter? And of course you're asking why it matters, because there is a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work on your back. And if you don't need to go out hunting down owners right now, when, right? Like, it needs to matter. There needs to be a good reason. And it's important for it to be clear. The thing is that in cooperatives, launching shares, selling ownership shares, tests that the vision actually resonates with the community you're organizing in that you want to serve. So if they aren't interested, it might be that the vision isn't that interesting to them. That isn't the solution they want, or they just don't want to put the energy into it. There can be a lot of reasons. Also, it tests your communication. The vision might be right on, but you might not be getting the word out. So it, you won't know for sure which one it is right away, but this is another major possible cause that we see a lot in stage 1. It's just struggling to have enough people and capacity and people with the skill set to get the word out. to be at events, to have community meetings, but to be doing social media and email. It's a lot. And we have to reach people in lots of different ways. Our communities aren't, we're not all watching the same TV channel, listening to the same radio station like we used to, right? We have to be hitting all these different ways to try and get people's attention. So maybe your communication isn't there. And that's important because if you aren't getting the word out to people in stage one, if you haven't yet found the right way, the right methods to get people's attention, you can't keep moving. You have to have effective communication with your community. They have to know where to find you, they have to hear you, they have to know you exist before you move forward. Otherwise, the problem's going to compound. And then momentum. We have to show community confidence. Why? Because when we're launching a food co-op, no one's ever heard of this idea before, and they don't think it's really going to happen. We know that when we get an idea into a community that is really different and unusual, something they're not used to, about 10% of us go, heck yeah, something new? What's going on? How is that going to, yeah, like how can I get involved? And everyone else goes, mm-hmm. And that's just human nature. And so if we launch shares and then sell 20, that really dampens community confidence and it dampens momentum. And momentum is going to be a theme throughout your organizing. It's so critical to success. We don't have something to show people yet. We have an idea and an organizing team. And we need them to get on board to make us big enough to really go forward. We need to do this together. But to develop their confidence is tough when we don't have a lot to show, right? So that can be very tough. Yes, we're not, yeah, it's a really good question, Dewan. I'll see if we can get back to it because about maintaining momentum. And there's plenty of people on here who are actually with startups that have struggled to maintain momentum into 2A. Like you can have it and lose it and regain it. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So the other reason it matters is you need those early development funds. No one else understands what a food co-op is. You might be able to get some small grants, basically only existing on paper. It does happen. But often all the money to do the early development work of your food co-op, from flyers and posters to getting your market study, is actually coming from the shares purchased. It's coming, our community is pooling its resources, and those resources are being used to develop the co-op. So we need those developing funds. Also, and these are the pragmatic ones. The ones on the first slide are the most important, but you also need those funds and you need more people to get this work done. These folks, as I put in here, I started these folks, and I pointed to, again, those purple dots that is kind of the core organizing team in the middle of the circle of hundreds of dots, the owners who don't decide to get involved with the board or be core organizers. Those people in the center, the core organizers, they cannot get all this work done. It will not happen without hundreds of owners behind them and some of them volunteering and helping in smaller ways. It will not happen. We've watched this again and again. The work between stage 1 to stage 2 doubles. And then when you get to 2B, stage 3, it almost doubles again until you really are starting to hand a lot of it off to a management team. So you've got to be building the number of people on your bench to keep moving forward. At launch, you should see a big burst of owners meeting a hoped for preset goal that maybe you've even stated to the community and meeting it within 1 to 3 months. We've seen a lot of startups say, hey, we're trying to get 200 owners in the first month. And we've seen others say, we're going to go for 500 owners in the first 3 months. And again, these goals will vary depending on the size of your community. A startup that started in Chicago, Illinois, had a goal of 600 owners in their first 3 months, and they made it, but that's Chicago. So it will depend on the size of your community. But you want to see this big burst of owners meeting a goal you've set, and within this window, if at all possible. I mean, these are signs of success. You want to be hearing lots of buzz in the community about the launch. That means it went well. People think this is interesting. They bought a share and they're telling their neighbor. And you want continued slower but consistent growth after those early launch months. So you may get, let's say, 200 owners. Let's say that's the right size for your community. It is very variable by community. I didn't say that was right for yours. Then you want to continue to see people trickling in, though, more people being attracted. That's a sign that your word has gotten out to the community. The vision resonates, people like the idea, and that slowly you're building that ownership base. That's what success would look like. Not everybody gets all of these. when they launch. Doesn't have, but, and there are ways to correct, but this is what success would look like. This is what we're aiming for. If you're not seeing it, is your vision easy to say and does it meet real wants and needs of your community? Quite often it's like people say, so what's the co-op? I'm like, well, we're gonna have this grocery store and so we can, and they just get lost. Can you say, hey, we're coming together as a community to build a grocery store since no one else is coming and we're gonna own it ourselves. Are you in? Like that is a quick, compelling statement. And it meets a need if the community really hasn't had a grocery store for a long time and needs one. Are the communication what we call vehicles reaching people? So if you're on social media but your community is mostly retirement age, and email is the right vehicle. If and a newsletter, are you reaching people? And when North Flint started organizing, social media wasn't working for them. Texting, they were at events and then had people sign up for a texting platform, and that was the right communication method. But they found a way to plug in, and that's what we need. Like, have you found a way to plug in where people are hearing you in your community? Is it clear how to join? And is it easy to do? Easy to do isn't find a form somewhere over here, fill it out, and mail it to a mailbox. Some people prefer that method, but in general, we need either a place people can go or most likely a place online. They can easily fill it out and do that. You can even bring, your little iPad to events and people can sign up right there, so forth. And that you have a way to take digital payments or payment plans. And have you built enough trust before launching? So sometimes the flaw we see is startups just aren't well known enough in their community yet. Not enough people have heard about them and they have not really built trust. Yes, Dawn, it is important to have a website. It is important to have a website before you launch because it's what people are looking for. It's what they expect. If you don't have one, they think, it's not really happening. It's someone's idea, right? Everything has a website. So yes, you should have a website. You should have social media. Real quick, a word on ownership goals. Ownership goals are not one size fits all. If you are in a tiny rural community and building a tiny store, if you are in Chicago and building one of the biggest startup food clubs we've ever seen, if you are in the middle, your ownership goals will be different. We can't get into that tonight. Like, well, how do you size them to folks? We have an entire video on it. Ownership growth planning and setting goals to success. It's on our YouTube page. You can find it. It looks like this on our YouTube page. And also feel free to reach out to me and have a conversation and say, hey, can we have a 30-minute call to talk about my community and its unique characteristics and how to set ownership goals? Happy to talk. All right. We have one more question in the chat. I'm going to look at that real quick before I keep moving. Oh, okay, got it. In stage 2A, so you have hundreds of owners. You've had your first democratic election. Again, you may be in a rural community and you have 200. You may be in, central New York and you have 600 owners at the end of stage 1. Wherever that is, you have hundreds of owners though before you move to 2A. You have your first democratic election. You're building your board. You're launching committees because you cannot get all this work done alone on the board. And most startups only have 1 to 2 really successful committees at first. Again, it's a whole other conversation, but you're working on building those teams. They can start to take some of the work alongside the board. You are doing business feasibility testing in 2A, and you're doing lots and lots and lots of getting the word out. You're working on saturating the community while building this business feasibility testing with the concept of the co-op. And the membership, the ownership goal that you're really paying attention to in 2A is doubling or more your ownership. This is the phase that you have decided to really move forward as the business. The community is interested. We've got people who are willing to do the work, and we are starting to test business feasibility. Do a market study? What size will the store be? What area? And what can it carry? And what would, if it's going to carry this, how is that going to affect how much debt we need to take on? You're really testing all that at the same time that you have got to be saturating the community with the co-op. You really have just gotten the early adopters on. Now we have to get a lot more owners. Again, and a lot more about how and what to do in 2A is in our book. So that's the big deal. We're trying to double that ownership. That's the big ownership issue in 2A. And I said doubling plus. So, we had startups who got to 300 in stage 1, usually at least to 600 by the end of 2A. We've seen higher, but usually it's around doubling. Why is important? These things are going to look familiar: momentum and community confidence. But that comes to the top now. We have got to show the community we're moving forward. More and more of their neighbors are buying in that this is a real thing. We are, as a community, we are really doing this. We've got to gain their confidence and get that momentum going, because that momentum moving and moving like that also starts to get out to your partners, to the people who might fund you, to the city who might give you that TIF grant, to the potential landowner, to all these partners you're going to need to get to opening day, who are hovering around within your community, either locally or in the cooperative community. They are watching this momentum and community confidence, because lots of community confidence for the local people means, oh, we better be on board because this has got momentum. People are talking about it. For politicians, for the co-op community, there's a lot of like cooperative lenders and so forth. There's a lot of, or even just the best consultants who could really work with you, but have a lot of people on their list. It's also just a like, oh, they've got their stuff together. We know that ownership and ownership growth is at the core of success. So, maybe we want to start talking to them about, a development loan, or we want to start talking to them about if we could be one of their funding partners. So it's critically important. And for the same reasons we talked about before, too, you're still needing those development funds. You need a lot more people to get the work done. And understand, only a small percentage of your ownership base will volunteer, will actually donate time and energy to developing the co op. But those 20, 50 people who maybe will eventually like really actually get involved and do a little something for the co op, still, but what they can lift compared to just the board, you need them. And you need to show those partners the co-op has support. During this stage, you should see steady ownership growth with planned larger bursts. Because at this stage, we should have a committee. This is the most important first committee, actually, is our committee, our outreach and ownership committee. We should have a committee, and our staff person can be paid staff. Sometimes that's very successful. With the skill and capacity to plan for ownership growth, to go out and have events, to know how to do what we call online mini campaigns for ownership growth, that they know how to set ownership goals and then have a big event and get people excited about being the 300th owner. And it's just that you have a team, whether it's a paid team or a volunteer committee or both, that are working on this issue. We need to have a team that's working on it. That's their main thing, and that they are able to create some steady ownership growth with planned larger bursts. Quite often, a lot of the techniques for ownership growth that we talk about, which we're not going here today, there's a lot of them. People will, well, we tried that and it didn't work. It'll be because there wasn't really capacity. There wasn't enough capacity in the team to really enthusiastically, energetically hit on those efforts. That doesn't mean they did anything wrong, but without the right capacity, those techniques won't work to really deliver on these different ways to attract people to join the co-op. And then you should see growing awareness in the community and a growing spirit of ownership, like of people being like, that's just a growing sense of like, yeah, I'm an owner, that people are a part of something, that even people who don't volunteer stop by your booth at the farmer's market, like, hey, get an update, say hi, because they're an owner. That sense of owner camaraderie. Yeah, Asada?
I was just gonna ask, and I'm sure this is treated someplace else, and maybe there's a resource on your website. But how do you create the sense of ownership when you don't have the brick and mortar yet? What is, I think, thinking about that and that sense of pride and owning something that is not tangible as the brick and mortar.
Yeah, it's a big question, Asada, and I will say that the more your community has faced disappointments and or economic harm, the harder it is to create that buy-in when there isn't something physical. Now, it's been done. Gem City Market, very successful at doing that in a community that's predominantly Black, but more importantly, predominantly very low income. It has been done by Fertile Ground. I don't know if anyone from Fertile Ground is on here. It has been done, but it's tougher. And I don't have absolutely phenomenal resources on that, but I think that we have one video we did with Gem City on how they did it. So if at some point you want to reach out to me, I'll connect you to that video. Actually, I'll make a quick note and see if I can find and just send it to all of you. Um, So I will give you a shot. I will try with that. See if I can find that for you
Thank
guys.
you.
Absolutely. You're asking terrific questions. Um, so if it's not working, yeah, if I can find the video, Tim, I'll send it out to absolutely everyone who registered. I'll see if I can find that. I don't know if it speaks exactly to that, but there's one in which they talk about that some. I've been really needing to pin them down to do a session specifically on that, how they created that sense of pride and buy-in, because they killed it over any food co-op I've ever seen. They opened with the most owners that has ever opened a food co-op, and their shares weren't cheap, and it was not a community with a bunch of wealth. So they created real meaningful sense of ownership. Um, has the co-op become a community presence? If you're not seeing the growth, probably haven't become really a meaningful community presence that people are getting used to seeing everywhere and doing things in and for the community. Is it possible the co-op's vision is too narrow? Occasionally, it's rare, but we've seen this. We've seen a group of well-intentioned people. This is usually more commonly with people who want a natural foods, local foods focused food co-op in a community that already has a lot of grocery stores. They'll be like, our community wants a food co-op, and they have a good sized small group of people who are organizing and working hard, and maybe the first 100 200 owners, and then it all of a sudden tapers off, and it'll be because the vision's too narrow. And we saw this in Oshkosh, if you know the Oshkosh Food Co-op. Was a bunch of people from the college that wanted to do this, which is a small portion of the community. And they got so far, and then it kind of petered for a bit when they realized they really needed to broaden the vision to not just be about natural and organic food, but about creating access in their downtown, and about creating jobs that stayed in the community, which had been a massive problem for that community. So they had to broaden the vision. That's occasionally the problem. And then is the co-op asking people? We've been amazed how often in 2A co-ops just stop asking because they're like, well, we ask them, then no one joins. And I say, no one, and they're like, well, one person. And I'm like, well, then you got to keep asking. And it's a tough thing to do unless you're a person who's comfortable asking people for stuff. I'm not. So it takes a little bit. When I'm passionate, I am. I can ask people for to join a co-op. I can ask people to make a loan to a co-op. I've done those things, but it's not easy. You have to be asking. Quite often, the problem too is we're not asking enough. And also, do you have a team with the capacity to get it out there, to get out that message about the co-op and the message about why joining matters? And I just real quickly, Fertile Ground ran into this. Fertile Ground Food Co-op is in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a historically Black neighborhood where where SNCC was formed. I mean, amazing co-op. They have their land now. They're fundraising now to start building the store, and they they had a lot of ownership growth at the beginning, and then it just stopped. And what they found out was they had a paid staff member who was out there in the community all the time, organizing them to get out in the community all the time and make all these asks. And that person moved on, and they didn't replace that person. And then they weren't asking. They organized a small group of owners to go out and go door to door and talk about the co-op. And lo and behold, the ownership happened. And then you have to have the team that can keep building on that and doing that. So often in 2A, part of the problem is there's no one out there asking. Okay. I want to touch on this real quick. And I will say, I'm going to wrap up at the top of the hour on time, no matter what's going on for our video, but I'm happy to stay and keep talking with anyone who wants to stay. We will hear a lot in food co-op organizing. Some of you who've been listening, coming to peer groups and listening to us talk longer and coming to conferences, some of you, this is new. But regardless, you're going to hear there's an order to do things, especially around ownership. And in the vast majority of startups, that is true. In rural communities, in big cities, in Black-led co-ops, in predominantly white-led co-ops, every kind of income level in the communities, we see that when co-ops start with ownership and then continue to grow it as they then develop the business plan for the actual grocery store, how big it will be, where it'll be, that is where we see success. This said, Detroit People's Food Co-op did it a little differently, and we don't know if it can be replicated yet, but it seems like a possibility for the right community. And by right community, we're going to say to our mind so far, means a community where there is a deep need to build trust first, because the community has been deeply and repeatedly harmed in the past and or present. If you feel that fits you and your community, some of you are just getting started, I still recommend launching, and Detroit People's launched ownership early on. So we'll talk about that. They didn't not launch it. It's not where they put their focus at first. And I know there's other co-ops, and there's another co-op on here that worked on the business and getting all the right players to the table in the city and finding the land or getting the right nonprofits, getting the right funders, applying for the grants. Like they really pulled the project together and now need to grow ownership. It's unusual, but we're starting to see it. Um, and so if you're going to look at it that way, potentially, if you're a community you feel fits this, then what they did at Detroit Peoples, again, we don't know if it's replicable yet, but it's something to keep your eye on. They did launch ownership early. It just wasn't their focus. They put all their focus on developing the relationships with the big movers and shakers and the planning for the business to get a site, to get funding, to get a big vision together for how they were going to serve the community and get all those players to the table. So they did vote, they did have owners. They just had pretty low ownership for a city the size of Detroit once they already had like a lot of the business development done. So another thing to keep in mind is Detroit People's Food Co-op was started by a nonprofit that provided paid, highly skilled full-time staff to do that business development work. So it was able to, they were able to get the right people to the table and really build something that was high profile. So while focusing on business development is real invisible to the community. They can't know about all the meetings you're having with this city council person, this mayor, and that bank, and this landowner. So much of that has to be kept under wraps. And so it's kind of invisible. It looks like the co-op's doing nothing. Detroit found a way to do all that invisible heavy lifting work and coalition building while keeping their project high profile. That is not easy. Detroit had leadership that was extremely good at that and already had a high profile. And so they were able to pull that off. If you are organizing in the dark over here, doing tons of work, important work, but you aren't also keeping the co-op and the concept of the co-op high profile in the news, talking about what it's going to do for the community and offering ownership, but not putting a lot of energy there, maybe don't have the energy for that yet, or you just feel like people don't have enough trust. They need to see that the business is developing first. You still have to keep it high profile. And then they did not shrug their shoulders and assume the owners would come. We've seen that. Renaissance Food Co-op, if you know, Renaissance Food Co-op was in Greensboro, North Carolina. Wonderful food co-op, wonderful project. One things they had point to themselves, they did not last very long. And one of the reasons was they got to 600 owners and said, that's good enough. People will just come. And I can point to many other examples. And of co-ops that, oh yeah, enough owners, we got the money, we got the site, we'll just do it, and then people will come. And it has never worked. From the most affluent to the most low-income communities, I have stories, I have examples, but they didn't shrug it off. They got really far in their business development and kept themselves in the public eye, and then said, you know what, we need to turn around now and put some serious energy now that we can show like we've got something here. We've got funders, we got the cities at the table, we got a piece of land, like we've got something. Now we need to focus on ownership growth. And they went out, they circled back, they put in a couple of years of work on that ownership growth while continuing to get everything in a row to start building. And they got it. This number over here in the left hand corner, 22,202 owners, is their ownership number as of 2 days ago. They went from a couple hundred owners and having a hard time to grow ownership to they get an owner a day every day on average. They have one of the best ownership growth rates in the nation right now of startup food co-ops. So I'm not saying did not, yeah. Western, yes, we've never seen that, Rachel. I'm not going to go too far into that, but yes, every time so far we've seen a nonprofit be the developer of a food co-op, it was their idea. We have not yet seen the reverse where a community decides it wants a co-op and has found a nonprofit partner who then gets on board and wants to develop it for them. I'm not saying it can't happen, but we don't have an example yet. So a couple last thoughts, and then I'm going to take questions. Just in the long run, why does this matter? Because even if you have a viable business plan, a site, and all the money, we have not a single success story of a food co-op keeping their doors open without appropriate ownership growth, community buy-in. We see they open the store and people don't show up. We see they get very close, they're almost there, but they need just a little more energy, and they have a site and they've raised most of the money, but they just need, and then it just peters out because you've got the same 3 people who've been doing the work for 5 years, and it breaks their back and they can't finish. Cooperatives can't be built by small groups of people and open and stay successful. I don't care how much money someone hands you. It won't work. We have plenty of examples. Without those owners, those hundreds of owners, we won't get there. All right. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I know there are questions, and we'll take a few questions. We have about 7 minutes for questions.
I'll just say that was amazing. I you you spoke to so many things that I have been experiencing and thinking about, and so many core lessons that provide us an opportunity to, move forward. So I just want to just thank you for what you shared. And, we are similar in Houston. We're similar to a Detroit. And I'll just say, I have been scratching my head around the organizing piece. And because there's no base building in Houston, in Texas. So
Mm,
there's nobody giving any money in the South to Black people building and organizing community. And so, even though we've been doing this work for about almost 10 years, we have never been able to get any money for organizing.
mm,
And so I was trying to, and then even the people who were movement activists haven't been interested in doing the co-op work, right? Even though we're facing gentrification, I haven't been able to get like movement people to see this as a movement to
mhm.
happen. um, and so, and then I reached out to an organizer and said, "Can you just help me organize this community?" And she said, "What's the campaign?" I said, "I don't care. What it can be whatever.
So true.
But if we're organized, we can utilize it." And so you just answered what our campaign is going to be about, and it's such a general ideal and was so grounded and rooted in self
Mhm.
determination and in ownership, like you kept
Yeah.
saying, because we have a construction co op and we got a home care co op, but people can't get it the way they will this grocery store. And so, anyway, I just thank you. I'm so grateful to you because you just spoke to so much that I've been struggling with, but now I have an answer for.
Well, I'm really honored. Thank you so much. And I know that what I reflected of Detroit's situation at the end there is not every startup, but it's and so for some of you in the room, it does not apply. It does not let you off the hook from going the traditional model. Your community can do that. But we are seeing more and more communities like yours, Asada, and we need to talk about it. And the reality is Detroit might be onto something in building some visible trust before they actually are focused on ownership growth. And I don't think we have time tonight, but Janiqua Jackson is on this call. She is the general manager, newly the general manager of Three Sisters Market. And they have done it in this order too. And Janiqua has been involved with other food co-ops, led other food co-ops, but she has just moved to Three Sisters. She's amazing, and I'm not handing out her phone number though because she'll kill me. Janiqua says hi. If she decides to put her email in the chat, that's on her. But but Janiqua, her co-op that she's decided to just become the general manager for has accepted the role with. I knew she'd do it. Her email is in the chat. Um, they built the business plan. They have these huge grants coming. They have the land. They have and they have a small number. Now they need to like they have a small number of owners, and now they really have to go back and get the community and build the ownership. So this is they're the second ones to attempt it this direction, but this is becoming something that communities that have been redlined and disinvested for a long time put nicely. I think we might be seeing more of this. I see your hand up, Karen.
Hi there. Thanks, JQ. So, I'm just going to echo what you just said because when I first started coming to the conference 5 years ago, I decided to reach out to Detroit because they have a similar demographic. And every community meeting I went to, when they were talking about building something in a community or somewhere around, the community was like, "Oh no, why are you putting that here? We need a grocery store." But then when I started going out in the community, it's like crickets. So
Mhm,
I have found out that actually Detroit People's Food Co-op,
mhm.
that's exactly what I have to do. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years, is reaching out to, other people, and I just did my first community meeting last October. And I'm starting, to go forward, because I've managed to get those relationships going. But yeah, I think that they are on to something, Detroit People's Food Co-op, because sometimes it's necessary with communities that don't have a lot of trust in what's coming up. And it's like, oh, I can be an owner. How can I be an owner? I don't have any money. So, it's answering all of those questions that people don't feel like they're worthy or that they can do it. That it's been an education, I tell you.
And also, like, answering the, "Hey, give us money for something that doesn't exist yet." They've heard that before too.
Oh yeah,
You
for
know?
sure. Oh
So
my gosh.
now, again, I feel like I'm letting off the hook a bunch of you who are not organizing in communities that are disinvested to anywhere near this level, and I'm not. And even Detroit, they went ahead and launched ownership, and they did get those core owners and those early believers, and that was valuable. But they didn't put all their energy to pushing that. They said, "Yep, the community's going to own this, and you can own it if you want to, but here's all the organizing we're doing, and we're building this business thing, and we're going to kind of prove ourselves before we go. And now we want you to join." Right?
And I
So
think the other piece is that it's not like we don't keep trying to do it. We haven't abandoned it. We're just doing it when and how we can, but we're utilizing the opportunity to build structural power, right? To be
mhm,
able to meet up with that community, organizing that community power. So you're absolutely right. It's not an excuse not to stay focused on it.
absolutely. And I will say again, for those of you who are not organizing in communities similar to Karen's, I want to be clear that we actually have seen not taking ownership launch seriously, and not worrying about ownership growth in communities where there absolutely is capacity for it, and it does not turn out pretty. If you're not getting ownership growth after launching ownership, there is a problem. It is one of the ones I listed, and I'm happy to talk with you in more depth. Um, we have to wrap up. I will stay and talk to anyone who wants to stay and talk, but we're going to wrap up just our session. This is what we have coming up tomorrow. We have 3 terrific sessions coming up tomorrow, very different. Building board strength and unity. I mentioned Fertile Ground Food Cooperative. They're a brilliant board chair, Erin McClellan, as well as Siobhan Mitchell and Kathy Nash from 2 other startup food co-ops. Some of the best co-op board leaders for startup food co-ops I've seen are going to be here talking about board strength and unity. It is almost at capacity. There are a couple more seats left. Go register on our website now if you want to be there. And then we're going to go into understanding and using your pro forma. If you were in today's session with Sarah and Don, they were talking about how do you find financial feasibility? What are the issues you're looking at? This is the tool of the pro forma. When someone hands you a pro forma, what does it mean? And how do you, as a board, use it? They're going to be talking about that. And then tomorrow night, I'm really excited. This is the wrong speaker listed underneath there. It is not going to be with me. This is going to be with Gabby Davis of National Co-op Grocers, and she's doing a session on supporting neurodiverse staff and customers. She is, I forget the exact term, but I think she's the diversity and inclusion manager for National Co-op Grocers. She's a phenomenal and interesting speaker. She has had some sessions that have really shook people up about treating food as an elitism and all sorts of great stuff. I love her. Come check out her stuff. Thank you again to our sponsors for making this series possible, and to all of you for being here tonight.